All right, everyone. We're going to hit our next tech talk. We have Jason Langone. Now, Jason, you were at San Francisco and you participated on the tech talks there. We're really excited to have you back. And today you're going to be talking about VMware View.
VMware View, a little Nutanix, a little Mirage.
Okay,
a little
excellent.
Drinking.
All right. Well, I will get out of the way.
Cool.
Pass it over to Jason. Jason, thanks again.
Thanks, sir. So good morning to everybody. For those that are actively on Twitter, which I think is probably everybody here, I encourage you to keep the flow going. I think there's a board over there this year, a board over there showing all the tweets. Please use the hashtag VBrownBag, Nutanix as well. If you feel free to interact. We've got a couple of books. So I've got a book out with Andre. I don't know if Andre's around, but we've got a VMware View 5 book that's, I believe, in the bookstore here. And then earlier last week, we had an interactive iBook come out on desktop as a service for anyone interested in that stuff. So the last session was, I caught the tail end of it. I think it was HP, Fusion IO, VDI. I'll kind of piggyback off that a little bit. Kind of skip through some of these slides here. So for those that are now actively designing virtual desktop solutions, for the most part, it's been a lot of the usual suspects, the Dell, the HP, the vBlock, the UCS of the world, the traditional infrastructure, right? Servers connecting to storage through compute. And what the last presentation talked about is that architecture is not really that well designed for VDI, so let's throw in some Fusion cards, ramp up to performance, and things like that start to make some sense. Because if you look at the traditional architecture, I'm assuming this is going to be shown as well, right? Cool. There's a couple of bottlenecks in here, right? You got a bottleneck on throughput of the network, right? How fast can my servers or my compute that are running the virtual desktops connect to the disks that are actually storing the virtual disks that are the virtual desktops? You've got controllers in the storage array or storage arrays, then you've got physics of how fast are my disks spinning in the storage array. And the last presentation talked about augmenting the storage array, which potentially are quite expensive, with Fusion IO cards for things like the replica disk, etc. The problem with the model that was presented in the previous session is unless you use some kind of software, data core or something like that, those Fusion IO cards are local storage. And if it's local storage, for those that have been doing VMware long enough know, you can't do things like vMotion, HA, DRS. Kind of the flip side of that is taking Fusion or some other solid state and throwing it in a storage array, and that seems pretty cool, like that should work. The problem is you're not doing anything for your network throughput, right? You haven't changed that. That's not scaled out as you've added in the solid state, and you're also probably putting a greater burden on the processors and the storage controllers because the disks are now responding that much quicker because you've got some really nice solid state in there. Controllers can't keep up. So you didn't really solve the problem. You solved maybe a third of the problem, the physics issue, but you didn't solve the other two. And I know Nutanix has a sponsor session later this afternoon, so I'm not going to do the hardcore, this is Nutanix, this is why you should love it thing, but essentially what it is, it's a 2U appliance, 4 VMware ESXi servers, 4 Fusion IO cards, 4 Intel SSD, and then 20 1 terabyte SATA spinning disks. On top of all that, we essentially put a VMware friendly version of Google file system. I'm going to kind of skip some of the marketing slides here. So what does that mean? So that means that the 3 different tiers of disks we've got are presented as shared storage. It looks like a NetApp filer, for example, if you present it as NFS, which you probably should be doing for VDI for a variety of reasons. But you've also got auto tiering, and if you're doing VMware View or the evil Citrix and Desktop, or even things like Mirage, as people start to look at that acquisition, there is a really strong need to have different tiers of storage. In View, for example, you've got the replica disk. Where should the replica live? It should live on screaming fast disk, because if it's on slow disk, everyone, if everyone's connecting off the same length clone here and it's running on super slow spinning disk, well, everyone's going to be slow and agitated, and if they've been drinking, they might start throwing stuff. So we want the replica disk to live on super fast. So in the Nutanix solution, it's on Fusion. To me, this is the only slide that's really worth looking at. The other ones are really pretty. The slide that's up on the monitor is, in my opinion, the money slide. So what this is showing is out of our VMware View reference architecture. And what it's showing is scaling from 300 Windows 7 virtual desktops to 3,000 Windows 7 virtual desktops. And for those that are engineers and consultants and architects, that are watching this, you'll know that when someone comes to you and says, hey, I want to do a 2,000 seat VMware View solution, I want to do a 500 seat pilot or whatever it is, you sit down for maybe a couple of days or a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and you start working on a BOM, right? I need this many HP servers, and I should probably throw some Fusion or some Intel SSD in there for the replica disks, and how many switches and switch ports, and how many arrays and IOPS and users per core, and all that nonsense, right? So not that it's not important, but a lot of times people get stuck in the lower levels of the VDI design, never focus on higher up the food chain. To me, I've been at Nutanix since January. I saw them VMworld 2011 when I was just a VDI consultant, which is what I've been doing the last 3 or 4 years. And to me, it changed drastically how I would start designing VDI solutions. So this is showing scaling from 300 Windows 7 desktops to 3,000. 300 is run on one Nutanix appliance. To get to 3,000, you just add 9 more. And what you're seeing up here on the monitor is flat linear performance, which is one of the unique characteristics of the Nutanix platform. Kind of skip through the presentation a little bit. For those that are looking to get started in VDI, maybe you've seen the keynotes, or you watched San Francisco, or I don't know what they announced this morning. I was still recovering from last night, but I'm sure there were some desktop announcements this morning. And you're ready to get started. Now, how do I get started, right? Do I go out and walk over to the VC booth over here and write at least in US, I know it's a 7-figure, pretty ridiculous check for this huge 42U behemoth? Maybe that makes sense, and maybe you got a ton of money, so more power to you. Or do you put together a bill of materials that's a lot of throwaway gear, right? Some stuff you get off like Newegg and you build yourself, or it's Dell entry-level gear, and you prove out that VMware View works for you, or VMware Mirage works for you, but you haven't really proved out the hardware, so it's throwaway gear. So, both of those are kind of the extremes, and it's what most people have been faced with today. Versus, an appliance solution, not even just Nutanix, obviously I'm pro Nutanix, but an appliance approach that has some kind of scalability component where you start with one appliance, and as you need and prove out that VDI and the platform works for you, just add more appliances. What was announced in San Francisco is that Nutanix is, I think, one of 3. I don't remember the slide in the keynote, but I think it was one of 3 companies launched with, or the relaunch of the Rapid Desktop program. For those not familiar with it, it is probably the easiest way to get VMware View up and running. It's a pretty interface. It has a bunch of scripts that power it on the back end. You fill out some variables. What's my domain name? What's a service account? How many desktops? Naming scheme, et cetera, et cetera. Goes out and deploys essentially the entire VMware View infrastructure. You can do that today on Nutanix as per the VMware or VMworld San Francisco launch. This is another slide I think is pretty important, and it's something I learned the hard way. So 3 or 4 years ago, when I first started doing VDI consulting, I spent all my time in the engineering stuff, the compute, the network, the storage, the crazy napkin math, users per core, or desktop, users per core, IOPS per desktop, the typical metrics you look at when you're doing a VDI design. And what I realized is I spent no time in helping people understand what VDI was going to mean to their everyday life, teaching people how to connect to it, teaching operational teams how to manage it, just preparing an organization for operational readiness. Needless to say, probably my first 3, I would say, VDI consulting projects I did looked great on paper, but they didn't really work out that great in the field because I spent so much time on the lower half of the stack, not enough time on the upper half of the stack. How am I going to deliver the applications? How am I going to manage user profiles? Am I doing non-persistent, persistent, et cetera? What devices am I going to support? So again, for me, Roger, the appliance model simplifies a lot of that, right? If I go back and here I've got to figure out what servers, what switches, what storage, where's my solid state going to live? How much of it do I need? How many users am I going to get on those servers? And if the environment grows, do I need to change the spec of my server, or do I need to, for example, buy a storage array and buy the most expensive head for it because I know I may grow out to 1,200 users or 1,500 users, but today I only need 200. So you've got a lot of inefficiencies in that type of a model. Or do I do the appliance approach? See, I think I got one other slide here since I just got the point. Yeah, it's another good slide. Hopefully it's still shown over here. So another reason I think I got a minute left. Another reason I think people have been cautious or slow to enter the VDI market, and my primary vertical, which is US Federal, is the opposite. They've been early adopters of this technology. But one of the reasons, just overall cost, right? If I'm a potential customer, VMware comes in and they preached the gospel of VMware View, and I'm like, man, I really like this stuff. And then, okay, I need storage, and I need network, and I need compute. Next thing I know, you've got one of the big boys over here coming in to say, great, you need $500,000 worth of storage to get started in your VDI project. Yeah, I probably put the brakes on it right there. So for me, the kind of the new breed of technologies, Nutanix being one of them, is really helping to ramp up VDI adoption, not even in just pilots, but in larger scale implementations. Again, Andre Leibovich, for those that know him, he's got a great website, myvirtualcloud.net. Anyone doing VDI's probably hit it via Google search at some point. We've got a VMware View book in the bookstore, and then if you also search for DAS book, Desktop as a Service, me and a few other folks, Steve Kaplan wrote the foreword to it, have a book up in the iTunes store as well. Thank you, sir. I'm all done.
Thanks, Jason. We really appreciate that. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm kind of excited that we're getting a lot more View content here in Europe. I know it's every year has been the year of the desktop, virtual desktop, but it is nice seeing more traction and more people getting value out of it, and obviously getting content delivered. So we really appreciate that.
Thanks, sir.
All right, and thanks again, Jason. We're going to be breaking for just a little while. I think we got about an hour break before we kick off with the not supported sessions and continue the work that we're doing here at VMworld Barcelona. So check back with us. We'll be here, and we'll see you soon.